6.5%, was it? Is that what the current odds are of the Stanley Cup?
Well, and if you look at the round-by-round progression, the Stanley Cup favorite is the Vancouver Canucks.
Like, what a time to be alive!
Talking you through every goalie controversy, scoring slump, and draft lottery bust, this is the C4 Podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com. Here they are, the best starting lineup we could afford under the salary cap. Chris, Matt, Anna, and Adam.
Welcome to another episode of the C4 Podcast, brought to you by Full Press Coverage. I am one of your co-hosts, Matt Lee. You can follow me on Twitter at MattLee_61, joined virtually by my talented co-host, Anna Forsyth, who you can follow on Twitter at AForsyth03. Missing in action today, Chris Golden, teaching, doing the thing, also teaching Adam Ovenell Carter, who did make a very brief appearance in Discord this morning, I must mention. Anna, how are you?
Yeah, you must mention that. I'm all right. I'm pleased and surprised to hear you refer to me as your talented co-host.
Oh, I'm
much
full
nicer
of
than
happy
you
things
usually
to
are.
say about all of my talented co-hosts. Speaking of Adam, I'm sure you saw it, Anna. You can follow us in Discord, by the way, going to bit.ly, the bit.ly link, and it's /C4 Discord, all caps. A special warm welcome, by the way, to a new Discord member, Hercules19, by the way, a longtime listener of the C4 Podcast who recently joined us here in Discord. So a warm welcome to Hercules19, one of our newest members to our Discord channel. Again, check us out if you want to interact with us while you're spending time in quarantine. Getting back to Discord, Anna, did you see how Adam very briefly made like a one-line appearance in Gate 16?
Super briefly.
And then went completely back to fading in the black. I asked Adam to give us an update.
It's almost as if...
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's almost as if you murdered him and then you made him appear briefly.
Right.
And then he went away again.
That's
still my favorite
conspiracy
theory.
We did say, though, that I asked Adam to give us like a TLDR update about his life over the last couple months, just because no one has sort of heard from him lately. And he just didn't respond.
No.
Like I said, what is the TLDR in your life?
Yeah.
Give it to us in a paragraph. Radio silence after that. So he went back to ignoring us. I have seen, though, I follow Adam on the IG, Anna, and I know he did go out onto the open waters with some friends. So he was on a boat recently as well.
Ooh, I hope it was socially distant friends.
I think they're his roommates.
Or did they not have COVID-19 on Bowen Island?
I'm just secretly hoping that he doesn't get washed away and attacked by a giant blue whale or something.
But if that does happen, it's nothing to do with you.
No, it is not. Anna, lots to get into on today's podcast. Some relevant Canucks news, of course, surfacing today, brought to us from Farhan Lalji of TSN, talking about the Vancouver Canucks announcing their list of 10 Black Aces, giving us an update on Michael Ferland as well as that of Josh Levo. So we'll get into those little tidbits of news today. We'll redo our starting lineups. I think the first time we had done our starting lineups for the Canucks in the summer was back when we did the first episode with Dan Murphy, friend of the show, Dan Murphy. So we had briefly discussed the lineups then, but now that we're seeing a little bit more clarity on the status of some of those injured players, Anna, a good time to sort of get back into that starting lineup. Who makes your game 1 versus Minnesota lineup and who doesn't? Also, phase 2 of the NHL's restart plan starting today. There are some Vancouver Canucks players that are in British Columbia. The majority of them remain abroad, either in the U.S. or in Europe, of course. We'll get into that. Doesn't sound like some of the players are returning to Vancouver anytime soon, at least until the self-isolation issue is resolved. We'll also talk a little bit about the NHL's diversity panel and the work that they have to do. Of course, the ongoing conversations that we are having regarding the systemic racism we are seeing, across the world, really, but of course magnified especially in the United States with the killing of George Floyd. So lots to get into on today's episode, Anna. So let's get right into it. So Anna, Farhan Lalji, as we mentioned off the top of the show, bringing us some news today mentioning that the Vancouver Canucks have submitted that list of 10 skaters and a goalie to the NHL as potential Black Aces yesterday. Of course, if you missed it, the NHL announcing that the teams participating in the play-in series and in the playoffs will be able to hold a roster of 28 players, no maximum on goaltenders. Let's run down briefly through the list here, Anna. But among the Black Aces, you got Mikey DiPietro on defense, Guillaume Brisebois, Jalen Chatfield, Olli Juolevi, Brogan Rafferty, and Ashton Sautner. And up front on the forwards, you have Justin Bailey, Reed Boucher, Tyler Graovac, Cole Lind, and Sven Berchi, noticeably in all caps, by the way, from Farhanlology. Anna, your first sort of initial reactions about those Black Aces?
Well, I mean, they contain a lot of people that we'd like to see where we are with them, but, you know, as far as playoffs goes, it's not really something you want to explore too much. Hopefully you don't have to, but it's such an unusual situation that obviously we want to have backup. I mean, we're a bit scared about even putting Demko in, never mind DiPietro, so the goalie depth does concern me if Markstrom were to go down. The defense is like pretty solid in terms of a backup list here. Obviously, we're still curious about Juolevi, but you know, Brisebois and Chatfield are solid. Rafty's like very up and coming. Sautner's like been around the league, and there's a decent amount of NHL experience in the forward group too. Along with some promising AHLers. Obviously, you don't want to depend on any of them, but like, apart from the goalies, I think it's decent lineup. What do you think?
Well, I mean, let's get into this first by starting off with the defense, as you mentioned. Well, let's Mikey DiPietro. I mean, I think there's no problem since you're able to have no maximum on goaltenders. No problem at all with having Mikey DiPietro practicing with the team. Seeing it's very akin to a training camp, giving him experience practicing with NHL players. I mean, we did see Mikey DiPietro definitely take a leap forward in his development in his first professional season. I think it's clear that Mikey DiPietro will be the Utica Comets starting goaltender next season, barring some unforeseen circumstances with the Canucks goaltending situation. You look at the Utica Comets roster right now, and you know Richard Bachman was loaned out to Europe. Zane McIntyre, he was traded off to Binghamton midway through the year. So really, there's not a whole lot of other goaltenders who are competing with Mikey DiPietro for playing time. You know, DiPietro has a very clear path to getting significant games next season with the Utica Comets. So I think the Vancouver Canucks are very invested in his development, and I think this is that extra step in giving him some of those meaningful moments in his career that are going to be very valuable for his development. So that's what I think on DiPietro. And you know, I know that Louis Domingue is still in the factor as well, but, you know, having 4 quality goaltenders doesn't hurt anyone. I mean, you're knocking on all the wood you can that, you know, Jacob Markstrom returns to health and he returns to full health. But yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts on Mikey DiPietro. I think it's a good move to continue having him grow in his development with the Vancouver Canucks if and when we get to return to play. On the defense front, I want to get your thoughts on this, Anna. Of that list of defensemen that are on the Black Aces list, and again, I'll run through for you: Brisebois, Chatfield, Juolevi, Rafferty, and Ashton Sautner. Which of these 5 really jumps off the page for you as players you would see get that first crack in the event of an injury to the defense?
See, I want to say Brogan Rafferty because he is that big name that really we haven't seen, but has been just adapted so well to the AHL level, and you want to see him if he can take that extra stride. But you do wonder if they'll go to a more tried and tested move of a Chatfield or a Sautner.
Not even Brisebois?
What do you think? Well, maybe Brisebois.
Well, okay, so here's the thing.
But, you know, Sautner's played a decent amount of NHL games.
For sure.
Slotted into the lineup.
So let me ask you this question. Of those defensemen, who do you think helps the team right now?
It's so hard to say. Like, Rafferty is far and away the most exciting. But, you know...
But Brisebois, for example, like Brisebois has played NHL games.
Right. and like Sortner has, I'm looking up now, is he has 23 NHL games. So like,
As has Rafferty, by the way. Like both Rafferty and Breezeball have played games, but I think in terms of professional experience,
mhm.
this is Rafferty's first real professional season. Whereas, Breezeball has played in Utica for some time now, and he's been more exposed to the Canucks organization in general.
Yeah. Um, but that's not to say that I think if you're getting down to these players, something's happened, something's gone wrong. So, and they'll get a decent look at them if they're training with a team day in, day out. And if Rafferty steps up to the plate in his one, he gets thrown in for one game and he's able to swim, that's we'll say a bunch about his development. So, yeah, I think that I think if they are confident doing that once they've seen him around training and stuff, a bit, I think it'll just be situational dependent. But I'd like to see it.
Yep.
Let
I
me put
mean,
it that way.
so your first instinct though is that you would have Rafferty be at the top of that pecking order if there was to be an injury.
Yeah, I want to see that.
Yeah, fair enough. Worth mentioning that Brogan Rafferty is a right side defenseman. Guillaume Brisebois is a left side defenseman. So they play two completely different sides. It all it is all contingent on like who could possibly get hurt, but um, I think it seems pretty clear to me that those two are the first two at the top of the pecking order. Like I don't seriously believe that the Canucks would be wanting to force Ole
Yeah,
Levy or
completely.
Jalen Chatfield into situations that they might not be able to handle. Specifically, Levy, of course, just
Yeah.
because he's a dainty flower, and we have
Yeah.
to take our time
Hmm.
with him. But you know what? Every rose does blossom every once in a while, right? Ashton Sautner, I actually kind of feel like I would rather have at the top of the pecking order over Levy. By the way, I think Sautner acquitted himself well in those few games he played with the Canucks last year. Another left side defenseman, Levy, also a left side defenseman. So I actually kind of feel Sautner at the age of 26 might be ahead of Levy on that depth chart pecking order if tragedy were to befall the Canucks defense.
Right. And yeah, he's shown that he doesn't he can adapt and he can get thrown in for a single game and be okay.
Yeah. I think the other intrigue here is up front, obviously, Anna, and I'll run through the list of forwards that are on the Black Aces once again here: Justin Bailey, Reed Boucher, Tyler Graovac, Cole Lind, and Sven Berchi. The same question to you: which of those five players do you really have at the top of your pecking list here in terms of if there were to be an injury up front?
I mean, it's still Sven Bacci. As much as I don't see him as a long-term future in this organization, he is an NHL player. He's not an AHL player. He stands every single person out of Utica doesn't understand why he's playing in Utica. He has playoff experience and he's someone I trust to play to an NHL standard in a high pressure situation.
Right. I mean, I think that's who I would pick too. But I think there's something ironic about how the Vancouver Canucks as an organization handed Berchi with a surprise demotion to start the season. And if the Canucks were to, enter a situation where they suddenly needed him, it's funny how the tables have turned in some ways with regards to Sven Berchi. I think for him, though, maybe you're looking at it as an audition for a future
Yes,
NHL job.
very much
Maybe
so.
there's a team watching that postseason, that play-in series that will take notice Sven Berchi and maybe be more willing to roll the dice on him that otherwise the team was not at the trade deadline when the Canucks were trying to move Sven Berchi.
Right. Yeah, as I said, I don't see him playing too many more games with the Canucks, but if there's a possible exit for him, but when it comes to the crunch in a playoff game, I trust him.
The other interesting one here, I think here, Anna, is Cole Lind. And obviously the Canucks
Mm-hmm.
hold Cole Lind in very high esteem. And, there once was a time not too long ago where we were talking about getting kids, good minutes and the experience. Is a play-in series different for you? I mean, I think we're in a different time now than we were last year when we were trying to get guys like Reed Boucher and, again, Brogan Rafferty and Josh Tevez some minutes in the dying moments of the regular season.
Yeah, it's a completely different experience. This isn't about development. It's about, getting through it. And it's such a strange
Winning hockey games.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a strange situation that who knows who's going to flourish in this. And Lynn's a very physical player. He's very powerful. He's taken great strides in Utica after quite a tricky start. So I think it all depends again, who are these players that are falling out of the lineup as to who you need to replace. Like Lind could plug in at that fourth line level, whereas Betchy can't really. That's not his game. But a Lind or a Bailey could a Grayovac has played at that fourth line level at the NHL and can do it.
Yeah.
But
I agree wholeheartedly, by the way.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
no, you continue. I kind of came to the end of my point there.
For sure. Okay. So I agree with, just to sort of piggyback of what you just said. I think I look at Cole Lind the same way I look at Olli Juolevi in this case, where I think there is a very good NHL future for Cole Lind, but we're not in the business of giving kids experience right now.
Mhm.
We're in the business of trying to win hockey games and winning a play-in series. For me, I mean, Sven Baertschi is a pretty clear and cut first preference in terms of the Black Aces if there were to be an injury. But I think Justin Bailey and Reed Boucher are pretty close behind. I mean, we saw Bailey in that short cup of coffee that he had with the Canucks this season,
An
that he can
espresso,
sort
if
of
you
play
will.
up and down the lineup. Yes, he's got some good size to him too that we really kind of underestimated throughout the year. I mean, 6'4", 214, he skates pretty well for that size. I think that's a player who can play up and down the lineup. If there were to be an injury to the bottom six, I think Bailey could step in pretty seamlessly. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that, because as we're going to look at our Canucks lineup in a few minutes here, there would have to be quite a few injuries for a Justin Bailey or a Reed Boucher to slot in. But again, I think that the Canucks Black Aces group looks pretty good.
Yeah, I'm kind of happy with it. It's solid. As you say, hopefully it doesn't get too much use. But yeah, I think there's some good experience. A lot of AHL success in there, and in terms of Batchy, some good NHL experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Some players who were not left on the Black Aces list, or at least we're not sure if they were eligible. First of all, we don't know what the status is on Nikolai Goldobin. Of course, he signed a contract with the KHL. He was KHL bound after this season. Whether he was eligible to be a Black Ace or not, it didn't seem like it was in the organization's best interest to include someone who very clearly is not going to be part of the team's future for at least the foreseeable future.
Right, and I think it might have required some
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it might require some, finagling of contracts. Presumably his contract, he's contracted to the Canucks till June or whatever he is. I just don't see the Canucks trying to make it work if it trying to sidestep all those issues that you might have to do.
Right. I think my assumption is that he wasn't eligible to play because his contract, like you mentioned, is up at the end of June. The team is probably not playing until early August, maybe even late July. So it seems like his NHL contract would have expired. So he would probably be putting himself in jeopardy with his KHL contract. So that's probably why Goldobin isn't eligible to be a Black Ace. Also not in that list, Lucas Jacek, Yona Gadjevich, Zach McEwen not on the list because of the fact he's currently on the Canucks roster by all intents and purposes. Those seem to be the big names for me that really stick out. Josh Tevez is another name who, of course, got a cup of coffee, but I think he's had a bit of learning curve in his
Yeah.
AHL season. So I think that list of 10 that we see is the correct list of players that should be considered Black Aces.
Yeah, I think you're right. Some of the names you mentioned, Gadjevich and Jacek, promising players, but do you really want to throw them into a NHL playoff game? Probably not right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a September training camp here. We're talking about a playoff for the Stanley Cup. So I think that list of 10 that we see is the correct list of 10. Take a break, Anna. When we get back, we'll talk about that other bit of news that's floating around, and especially the status of Michael Furlan, as well as that status of Josh Levo. We'll get into our Canucks playoff lineups revised. What is it? Canucks playoffs 2.0 right after this.
He liked to say the F word.
Well, then get the here then. Okay, see ya.
Is going to have the F word on it.
I wish I could give you an explanation about it. I can't. You, out of here.
You said the F word, Dad.
You called me the F word.
So, Anna, part 2 of Farhan Lalji's news dump of the day is that Michael Furlan will begin skating at the Winnipeg Jets facility once it opens. We don't know when that's opening. Furlan, according to Lalji, has gone through testing and has been cleared to skate. No symptoms, and he believes he is close to being ready to play. If Michael Furlan's progress continues through training camp, the expectation is he will play against the Minnesota Wild in that play-in series. Less optimism, though, surrounding Josh Levo, who's, of course, suffered a fractured kneecap. Lalji reporting that he is still doing rehab and that his injury is taking longer than expected. Unlikely that Josh Levo will be ready for the start of training camp in July. The pending unrestricted free agent may not be ready until next season. Start with Michael Furlan, Anna, and that's, of course, where the intrigue seems to be here. We touched on Furlan earlier, and that we don't want him rushing back unless he's 100% completely and ready to play. Your thoughts on this bit of news?
Yeah, I think we've said before, we've expressed concern over how he'll do, but he's showing all the right signs, and I don't know what else he can do before actually getting into a game that would make us change our minds. So he's doing as much as possible to show he's ready, so it still remains to be seen how he'll do in a game, how he'll do skating with a whole team, because I think just that NHL speed will show a lot, but I don't want to, as long as it's safe, I wish them best and hope he does come back up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously this is a little different than the last time Michael Furlan was working his way back from the concussion protocol. A lot time has passed compared to the previous time when he suffered that setback in Utica. And I do think that time does count for something here when you're coming back from a concussion. You're not rushing back to play. I think the very clear thing here is that we know Michael Furlan at 100% is a very effective NHL player. It's very interesting to look at the prospect of Furlan being in your lineup in a playoff series. And I see an impactful player there, at least physically. And he has that physical presence that teams definitely notice as well. So for me, I and we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think if Michael Furlan is clear to skate and he's ready to go and he's 100% ready to play, I mean, he's going to get some skates in practice and everything, but I probably wouldn't have much hesitation to putting him out there in game 1 against that Minnesota series.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot more confidence that there hasn't been any setbacks as yet, but I think a lot will change when he starts skating properly and skating with people. Yeah, because you can skate by yourself and feel confident, and then when you're getting into line rushes, that does change a lot, but I definitely feel more confident.
I gotta I have to see him taking contact in practice as well.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not putting him out there in an NHL game to have him, injured 5 minutes into the first period, and then we're playing with 11 skaters up front.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, for me, there's got to be a lot of checks and balances that have to be made on Ferland just to ensure his health. And to jeopardize him would be quite bad from an organizational standpoint. Your thoughts on Josh Levo, and I think this was kind of surprising to me anyway. I think Josh Levo's injury took place, earlier in the season, to the point where we had all thought that there was the possibility Levo could be ready for April before the pandemic started and halted play. So for Josh Levo to still not quite be at a point where he's past rehabilitation is quite surprising to me. So what are your thoughts on Josh Levo's injury taking longer than expected to heal?
Yeah, it's disappointing. I think we all put him in our lineups. I think Murph put him in his lineup initially, and there's been rumblings for like a week or so that he hasn't really been responding that well to his rehab. So it is disappointing, and given like Canucks are sort of supposedly a top heavy team, it's a shame to lose like one of your more skilled players out of that sort of middle six role. Yeah, obviously we want to know how he would return, but I think he has been quite promising. So yeah, it's disappointing, and it's disappointing for him, and I hope he's able to, start fresh next season and continuing to improve.
Yeah. On the topic of Levo, was trending to be a very solid player for the Vancouver Canucks when he was injured. 36 games into the NHL season, he had 19 points and 7 goals, so he was looking at a 40-point pace around the time of his injury. The problem is, and you mentioned this, Anna, hopefully ready for next season. We don't know if Josh Levo will be back next season.
Right.
He's another impending UFA, and as we've talked about ad nauseum here on the show, there are a lot of other players that are probably taking priority over Josh Levo before the Canucks can get to him.
Yeah.
So the question now becomes, have we maybe seen the last of Josh Levo in a Vancouver Canucks uniform?
Given like all the Jags we have signed to non-Jag prices, it's such a shame if his like potential gets squandered over all those bad deals and him not being a priority. But at the same time, those deals have been signed, and we have a lot of important deals coming up in the next few years. So those are definitely more important.
Let's get into this a little bit here. I mean, Josh Levo, he was making $1.5 million, I believe, on this contract before hitting unrestricted free agency. What's the appetite for you and bringing him back on a 1-year show me contract, or roughly around the same amount of dollars? I mean, that could be a bargain,
right? Like, given he's sort of that middle six player and has played in the top 2 lines previously, that's pretty cheap. So if there's space to make that work, and given like where he came from and really not doing well in the Leafs organization at all, hopefully there's some appetite for him to stay where he is and make it work.
My sense on the surface here is that the Canucks' plans for Josh Levo probably and ultimately hinge on how much it will cost to sign Tyler Toffoli to a new contract. You look at what Tyler Toffoli's position is, and you look at who he was replacing. He effectively replaced Josh Levo in that second line role for the Vancouver Canucks. Toffoli's making $4.6 million this season. It's likely he's probably looking for $5 to $6 million on his next contract. If the Canucks can't come to terms with Toffoli and Toffoli walks away as a free agent, I think that's when they might circle back to Josh Levo.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's gonna be a huge priority. Like, what happens with Markstrom, and then subsequently what happens with Toffoli. If they're able to land Toffoli, that might spell the end for Josh Levo. But if they're not, he's a very cheap replacement.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. I definitely think that there's a place for Josh Levo on this roster, but I think at the end of the day, it will come down to dollars and cents. If Josh Levo is willing to take that short-term show me contract, I might welcome him back, whether Toffoli signs or not.
Right.
So
yeah.
Let's take this conversation, Anna, into your lineup now for the Vancouver Canucks against against Minnesota in Game 1, and it's been about a month or two since we last had this conversation when we caught wind of the NHL starting up again for that restart plan. We talked about this with Dan Murphy. I want to know, given what we now know about Michael Furlan and what we now know about Josh Levo's status and the Black Aces, let's go through our lineups for Game 1 against the Minnesota Wild. I mean, up front for me, and I'll start here, it's pretty clear that it's going to be JT Miller, Pettersson, and Brock Besser on that top line. Any thoughts? Any qualms with that?
No qualms. That's what I had as my top line initially. I don't think I've changed my mind. Obviously, I know a few people want to throw Toffoli on the top line, and I'm not averse to that, and I think we'll just have to see how it goes. But for now, I'm sticking with that Miller, PD, Besser.
Yeah. Yep, and I think that leaves a very clear and obvious second line of Tanner Pearson with Bo Horvat and Tyler Toffoli on that second line.
Right. I mean, it's just clicked. Pearson and Horvat over the whole season, and Toffoli's just jumped in and adapted very well there. So I think that's pretty clear second line.
Right, and now the real intrigue sort of starts at that third and fourth line spots. There are probably about 8 or 9 guys competing for 6 playing spots. So Anna, this is probably where we might meet some discord here, if you will. I think for me, I'm keeping Antoine Roussel at the left wing spot on the third line, and I'm keeping Adam Gaudette in the third line center spot, and I'm slotting Michael Furlan onto the right wing there.
As your third line. Jumping, squishing Jake off that third line.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Do you rather go with a Jake Virtanen who has played, what is it, 2 or 3 playoff games, or do you rather go to a Michael Furlan who pretty much was a thorn in the Vancouver Canucks side when he played as a Calgary Flame member in the playoffs? By the way, Jake Virtanen has not played in a playoff game for the Vancouver Canucks, so he's got 0 playoff experience compared to Michael Furlan.
But that's not his fault that the Canucks have been terrible.
I know.
Not entirely.
But I think that's part of part of the reason why. Virtanen has definitely held into that middle 6 winger spot because of the fact that there has been more vacancies in that area.
Yeah, that's fair. But I think I would still stick with Roussel, Gaudette, Virtanen as that third line. Just because if you stick Furlan on there, you lose that speed. That slows that line right down. It changes it, and Furlan brings something else. But initially, I'd want to keep Furlan. I mean, these are just nominal things. Some Roussel, Gaudette, Virtanen often got the lowest minutes out of anyone. It really depends the game you're playing, but I wouldn't want to hamper the speed.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. Part of me, and I do have Virtanen in my lineup, and I have him on my fourth line here, so I'll get to that in a second. But part of me wanting to do this is I think Furlan can play tougher matchups a lot better than Jake Virtanen can, and if Jake Virtanen is in a fourth line role, he can play a lot more softer matchups that he might be able to take advantage of. On my fourth line, Anna, as a result, left over, I've got Tyler Mott on the left wing, I've got Brandon Sutter on the fourth line, and then I have Jake Virtanen on the right wing.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I would also stick Mott and Sutter there, but obviously I'm putting Michael Furlan rather than Jake Virtanen. I do want to kind of stick with, I think both Murph and Sat said this, that carrying an extra center in your lineup is no bad thing. So having Mott there as a spare center to take draws or just slot into that center role if he's needed is no bad thing, which would be why I wouldn't take Zach McEwen. I can obviously see Beagle being used in that fourth line spot, but if I'm picking rather than Travis Green, I'm having Beagle sit. And obviously Louis as well.
Right, and if you remember, Yeah, and if you remember the conversation we had with Murph, he even sort of alluded to the fact that having Sutter and Beagle in the same lineup was kind of redundant. So that for me seems to indicate that it should come down to either Beagle or Brandon Sutter. One of them's got a Stanley Cup though, and one of them doesn't, but I do think that Sutter is the more effective of the two players.
Yeah, I think just defensively, I do trust Brandon Sutter a bit more.
Right. Yeah. And so you mentioned Jay Beagle and you mentioned Zach McEwen as some of those spares. Also included in the spares there, Louis Eriksson, of course. I think that was almost a foregone conclusion given that the Canucks were pretty close to 100% healthy up front.
Mm-hmm.
I do think of those three spares, I'd really like to see Zach McEwen in a playoff game as well.
Me too.
If Michael Furlan isn't at a point where he's 100% ready to go, I have no problems or hesitations with moving McEwen into the fourth line right winger spot and bumping Jake Virtanen up to the third line.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, we've seen that McEwen is solidly an NHL player now. I don't see him going back to the A at all. But yeah, that's a real test, isn't it, to see how you perform in NHL playoffs.
Yeah. Throughout the rest of the lineup, it's pretty cut and dry. Not as much drama there. In that top pairing, you've got Alex Edler and Tyler Myers, I assume. Then you will have Quinn Hughes with Chris Tanev. And then likely two of the three of Jordy Ben and Troy Stetcher or Oscar Fantenberg being in the mix. My preference is to, again, still have Jordy Ben in place of Oscar Fantenberg, though.
Yeah, I mean, me as well. Like, Stetcher's not been great with Fantenberg at all. And I definitely want Stetcher in there. So marginally, I say Ben, but yeah, that whole the defense doesn't fill you with confidence, does it?
No, it doesn't. I will say that if you're not liking Jordy Ben or Oscar Fantenberg in that left spot, you could do worse with than having Guillaume Brisebois in there if you want to have a little bit of a different look.
Well, I think with that lineup of Black Aces, the defense is pretty good. So I'm hoping that last pairing does feel like they have to perform, or there's plenty of other up-and-comers that could take their spot.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, in goal, no drama here. Jacob Markstrom will regain his starting spot after returning from injury, so that one seems to be a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, that's an easy pick there.
All right, Anna, we'll take our next break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of those Canucks players who are in town, but they have their own arrangements. Rogers Arena set to open, but doesn't sound like the ice is going in anytime soon. We'll talk about some of the players who are staying in their own hometown until the self-isolation issue is resolved, as well as the NHL diversity panel. So all that coming up next here on the C4 podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com and on the Full Press Coverage Network.
Take hitting out of the game. You can't hit anymore, so don't do it.
The unsportsmanlike conduct, I want to get an explanation on it.
No kidding.
Because how do you get suspended for unsportsmanlike conduct?
Plus interference. There's no interference there. He had the puck.
Now, Madison never ever did that before. Now, why did he do it? Because he was mad.
Well, your early favorite for the Calder Trophy, that's for sure. Elias Pettersson, you might even say your early favorite for the Hart Trophy.
Just to get back to your question, Elias is going to play plenty. He didn't play. He's going to get a lot of power play time. And, yeah, I'm concerned about our offense. We lost 200-point players, and we've got to find a way to score.
So, Anna, phase 2 of the NHL's restart plan starting this week, and we learned earlier that there are 3 Canuck players who are currently in British Columbia. The rest of the roster still out of town. The players who, if I'm not mistaken, are in town: Troy Stetcher, Jordy Ben, and Jake Virtanen. Is that correct?
And Alex Edler. He never left.
And Alex Edler.
So he's never going to leave.
There's a few players. Oh, he's never leaving. And no movement clauses be damned. So it doesn't sound like players are returning to Vancouver anytime soon. I think that's all well and good. Have you heard anything about like the 14-day quarantine that's still in effect and if there's any sort of movement on relaxing that for players?
So I think that's still something they're working on. But here's my beef. So, like, people, like, NHL players who have arrangements can, like, train now. And I'm sure if there were enough players, they would open up Rogers or, like, make it work with that, if that was beneficial. If they, like, it's really not ideal, the self-isolation thing. But if they decided now, like, to get over that, like, and come, like, everything would be sorted in 2 weeks' time. Just, like, what if you keep delaying it and there ends up being no exemption? And then you have to spend your, like, 2
Right. So
weeks
what you're
in
saying is,
self-isolation down the track.
so are you trying to suggest that players should be trying to come back now if they can?
I don't know, it just, like, concerns me that, I don't know, it just seems like it's such a public health thing, there's a reason why it's in place, that, like, I know they wanna, like, train, but, like, they could have come back 2 weeks ago, and now they would, like, when they announced phase 2, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever they announced it, and then they'd be on Rogers Arena ice tomorrow. Obviously, you know, it sucks saying that now but, like, is, like, Brock Besser really doing himself good on the boat in Minnesota?
He does seem to be out on the lake quite a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I'm sure he's working out and stuff, but it's so far from, like, ice fitness. Like,
You sound like the disappointed parent at the
oh,
moment.
yeah, I know. I don't wanna be that person, but I just think if players, I know there's a mental health issue, and I know it's tough, but, like, if players got over themselves, like, 2 weeks ago, they could be training today.
Right. So this is the fan first mentality here, is that you're wishing that players were making that commitment to come over now, to quarantine now, and to, you know, get the wheels in motion for that restart for August 1st.
Yeah, and obviously, like, I can understand that it's uncertain, and then if they came over now, and then they, you know, like, after their 2-week quarantine, they waived you know, they made the exemption, but then you still are not, like, you know, you'd still be in the same position. It means, like, you'd still be, like, starting training at the exact same time, surely. Like, I understand the frustration, but at the same time, you just wonder if it's worth just putting aside that.
No, for sure, I
That's my
understand.
soapbox. That's it. Rant over.
No, it's not quite. What will the Canucks do with Demko and Markstrom in expansion, like Chris would say, or it's not. It's not the recapture on Luongo kind of a thing, but it's not bad. It's a solid 7 out of 10.
Thanks.
Soapbox level.
I'll take that.
Anna, you before we go, you wanted to touch on the NHL diversity panel and the work that they have to do. You want to get into that for a little bit?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it. Just I think given, you know, the context, it's an important step. The people on the panel, like Evander Kane, who's spoken very well recently as well on diversity and, like, his struggles with that. Akeem Alou, who wrote that wonderful but also very sad article in the Players Tribune, like, detailing his experiences, and a few other players that just, like, you want that, like, those good voices. You just hope that the NHL is taking this seriously, and it's just not a token move to satisfy
Right. So
the appetite.
So I'm
for
looking
change.
at the official. I'm looking at the official release here. For the record, it's called the Hockey Diversity Alliance, I think is how it's worded here.
Yes,
and
that's the
you
official
mentioned some of
term.
those members: Akeem Alou, Evander Kane, Trevor Daley, Matt Dumba, Wayne Simmons, Chris Stewart, and Joel Ward. Also part of the Hockey Diversity Alliance. I do think it's an important step, and I'm hoping that it's something that's a lot more than just people gathering together. I am hoping that it is a group that affects real change. It's at least for me something that helps start the conversation and doing something to eradicate what has become a systemic problem, not just in professional sports, but again across the world.
Definitely. Because I know a lot of those players haven't necessarily been super vocal about their experience as minorities in hockey, but now that they have this platform and this backing, hopefully they'll feel like open to speak and supported and like they can really do something.
Right. Just from a local perspective, and I know that he takes a lot of heat for his off the ice quote unquote antics, if you will, of when he was younger. But it is nice to see Vancouver product Evander Kane being so vocal about what has become a very real issue. He has been sort of on this charge since day one, and so kudos to him for taking that step to try and get the conversation started.
Definitely. I think there's such a thing as, developing. Like, he's definitely matured as a person and a player over his career, and let's not forget the different standards that players of color are held to in terms of their attitude and whatever. They're definitely held to that different standard. So, yeah, I think he's over the recent years he's really shown that he is that thoughtful and considerate player, and now he's in a position to really do something with that.
Yeah, for sure. Anna, before we wrap things up here on the C4 podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com and on the Full Press Coverage Network, anything that you'd sort of like to add?
No, but things are getting a little more real. We're talking about lineups and player health, and obviously we're still a ways away from playing, but I'm excited to see a few more players on the ice in the next few days and weeks.
Yeah, I just want to say I do echo your thoughts about players coming home. I mean, for me, it doesn't sort of become real until the players actually return back to Vancouver for training camp. Otherwise, it's all just sort of conjecture for me at this point. So I think I'm looking for that real sign that hockey is coming back. And for me, it doesn't really sink in until you start seeing players back in Vancouver. Till I see Bo Horvat in the Dad Lee's backyard and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Well, that's going to do it for us here on the C4 podcast. Another great episode where we talked about Michael Furlan and Josh Leivo's status updates. We talked about the Black Aces that the Vancouver Canucks may or may not be featuring throughout the play-in series and beyond. A great episode. My thanks to you, Anna, for talking to me about it. Hopefully back with Chris Golden next week for the full crew showing up here. With all that said, I guess, the two magical words. We're out.